Hello and welcome to the latest in the Somerford Associates series of podcasts where we focus on issues of contemporary interest to the IT industry. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Slater. Andy, a very warm welcome.
Hi.
Andy is the IT Observability and Automation Lead for Specsavers. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks.
So, observability and IT automation. You recently had a significant investment in Splunk observability platform. I'd be interested to know, well, what's your definition of what does observability mean to Specsavers?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it's still something that a lot of the industry is wrestling with. I think to make real, I think if you like, the dictionary definition is looking at sort of metrics and logs and traces and various signals and bits of information from IT systems and trying to weave them into a story that tells us what is happening and what has happened. I think for Specsavers, there's still that sort of cultural battle to change mindset from, it's just monitoring with a new fancy name and some shiny bells and whistles to it. And that's sort of part of my job is to kind of highlight the opportunities that observability or true observability brings. Being able to see the exact state of our systems, being able to predict where problems might lay down the track for us, and being able to kind of act on some of those monitors and alerts to kind of avoid disaster or to rectify disaster before anyone notices.
Okay. And you as a company made a significant investment in one of our partners, Splunk. What were the business drivers for that in the first place? Could you sort of unpack that for people, please?
Yeah, sure. I think probably going back about 6 years ago, we came to you guys and Splunk with a few pilot use cases to look at some areas where we were having some problems. And I think to set the scene, we had kind of 20 plus different bits of monitoring tools and log observers and various different kind of GUIs from various different pieces of software or instrumentation. And that caused us a number of headaches. In investigating an MI, we kind of had to almost round robin the different tools, starting with the one we thought was most likely, rule out issues with the network across 3 different pieces of software. No real control over a single pane of glass for what's actually happening before we can even get to the part where we start to kind of fix it. And that was a big driver for us. I think that ability for us to try and choose an ecosystem of tools where we could instrument different parts of the systems that we had to tell us a story and to give us live information where we needed live information, but also to be able to kind of look back in time and dig deep into the logs and look at exactly what happened or what happened in the build up to. That was a big part of the decision we made.
Because you had, if I'm not mistaken, you had something like 21 different monitoring tools, didn't you? And I'm assuming that by consolidating all of that, there was obviously a longer-term resource implication as well. But also, brings about significant business benefits, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. As I say, we've avoided that issue where you sit in an MI in the first hour as everybody scrambling through the systems that they're responsible for to say it's not us. Having that kind of single pane of glass to sort of point to the issue a lot faster has sped up significantly our kind of mean time to resolution just in that identification phase. And I think we pushed a stat out recently where we think Splunk's given us 10 times faster mean time to resolution, which in a world where time is money and system downs cost us money, or certainly cost us reputation and money.
Yeah,
so it's a big gain.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And there are lots of these monitoring platforms around. Why did you decide on Splunk then?
I think its ability to weave in and aggregate not only the bits that are instrumented directly from Splunk, but we've drastically reduced that 21 or 22 different tools down to sort of a handful where Splunk is the kind of the master of those. So we have some other platforms report information into Splunk either via API or via different connectors and different systems that way. But I think that ability for it to give us that holistic picture while still being able to dive deep was the big kind of selling point for us. And that I think we've found it quite easy to ramp up our knowledge and our understanding and kind of really kind of bring to life the value very quickly from Splunk. I think that was a
Which
key
is
bit
important,
for one
isn't
of
it?
Yeah,
of course, that's important. So no regrets yet then?
No, not yet.
And how you sort of touched on this earlier on about how I guess there's a need to sort of shift in mindset as well, where you've got teams that are historically, working independently, and then there's a challenge, and it's the IT ops team are sort of running around with their hair on fire, and perhaps other elements of the team are all trying to identify where the challenge is. How has that cultural change come about? I mean, or are you still grappling with it? And what advice would you have?
I think it's fair to say we're still grappling with it. I think there was an interesting kind of split away from various different teams instrumenting their own stuff, or looking at the investigation or looking through the logs of their own bits of software that they were kind of really down in the weeds of understanding, and it was their responsibility, their baby in some cases. So I think kind of almost taking that away and pushing everything through a Splunk platform kind of has led a bit of dependency onto my teams to have to be the engineers and the builders of some of those dashboards and a lot of that instrumentation. And we're now fighting the reverse of that, where we're sort of trying to democratize the use of the platform and push that back to those product teams, those engineering teams, those network teams, those ops teams, to kind of own the design of what Splunk does for them. And that ability to kind of go, well, previously or historically, you'd have had to look in these 3 different places. Well, what about one shiny dashboard that shows you all the information from that, as well as some other stuff that may only be relevant every now and then, but it's nice that you don't have to go looking for it because it just sits as a nice panel in your dashboard. Yeah. And it's quite an easy sell, but then it's a different set of skills to kind of push to those teams to sort of, embed that mindset of we own the consumption of that data, and we want skin in the game to talk about what do we want it to look like, what visualizations, what data do we want to see, what's important to us, what does good look like.
And it's so I sense from what you're saying there's been a greater emphasis on collaboration across the organization, which can only be better, can't it? Really?
Exactly.
Can only be more positive.
We're a big proponent of agile ways of working, and that all falls flat if there isn't communication and collaboration between the different teams. But we're very much kind of baking in observability into the culture in the same way that security was kind of woven in a number of years back, and it's now just accepted. Every project we run has security baked in. Yeah. We're getting to that mindset where every project we run has observability baked in and some automation baked in as well.
And I'm assuming then that, like everything, there's always a bit of resistance, or there's a bit of, the level of cynicism is always, it will sort of be there until people see the results. So, I mean, for example, security teams have always historically been seen as the speed bumps to progress. But when they start to see through an observability capability that actually for example, credential stuffing attacks can be easily identified and the source of those, stuff like that makes your life a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think every success we have, be that kind of avoidance of a big MI or a big disaster, or instrumentation of a new product which sped up the delivery cycle and things like that, is a huge win that kind of builds that positive PR and snowballs it. I think as soon as somebody's seen the value of that, I often talk about our ops teams. Kind of we deliver new dashboards, or they kind of build their own thing, which at 2:30 in the morning saved them, an hour of investigation, so they were back in bed an hour earlier. Again, a real easy win.
Every little helps, don't we?
Exactly.
As we all know. And then what about, I guess, when you then translate that in terms of ROI to execs? It's all about the bottom line, of course, and you could presumably quite easily demonstrate that actually, for example, where you're able to retrieve data for the customer experience, for example, and demonstrate actually where you've had an outage, you've been able to identify the source of that and rectify it a lot swifter than perhaps you had been able to before, and the customer is happier. How does that sort of message resonate quite easily with your execs?
Yeah, I think it does, and I don't think it's a secret that Splunk isn't a cheap tool to do. So there's a lot of justification. Every renewal cycle is a question mark over that big block of money that's allocated to observability. And as you say, being able to demonstrate the cost savings or the potential cost prevented from avoiding an outage is one of the tools in our armory.
Yeah. I guess the other thing as well is there must have been a bit of stress reduction for you all as well. I mean, when we mentioned running around with your hair on fire, the ability, when you've got false alerting and that sort of generates a lot of stress and stuff like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're in a still in that constant battle of kind of how much noise is too much noise. Of course. When exactly do we want to be notified of something that could go wrong, that might not go wrong, and needs a level of observability just to check whether it will teeter over the edge. So there's constant refinement that we do to all of the thresholds and all of the monitoring and alerting that we have in place. But yes, definitely when we kind of get to that point where we can really easily identify where an issue is, particularly thinking about the observability suite of tools where we can instrument an entire sort of application architecture, and it gives us a nice big shiny red light on the thing it thinks is wrong, which more times out of 10 is the thing that's wrong. It's a simple bit to go, right, how do we fix that thing?
And I guess what it strikes me as is it's all about resilience, building a resilient organization, isn't it? And I know we've spoken previously about organizational resilience. You're in in an industry where you're trying to generate money, generate revenue. I mean, it must be hugely important to you to be able to make your organization as resilient as it possibly can be. And I'm interested to know what resilience means to you as an organization as well, actually.
Yeah, I don't think we're too different from every other organisation out there. We have to, as much uptime as we possibly can, a smooth customer experience with as little lag. We talk about friction-free IT for our colleagues as much as we do about our customers. It shouldn't be painful to interface with an IT system. Yeah, I think particularly in this day and age, if something takes more than a handful of seconds, that's too long, and attention's moved elsewhere. Or nobody wants to wait for a web page to load anymore. Nobody wants to get an error on their iPhone or Android app to say, no, we can't do that thing that you wanted to do. Yeah. Try again in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I'll go find it somewhere else then, or I'll forget about that, and that impulse buy was lost, or that visit wasn't booked, or that eye test wasn't rearranged. And all of those things
they all contribute, don't they? Of course they do, yeah. So, and if you can minimise the amount of friction, fratricide, or whatever you want to call it, then absolutely that's going to be a benefit to the business. You talked briefly earlier about the complexity of modern IT systems, and we're talking about microservices, multi-cloud, and all the rest of it. What do you see as the biggest challenges in achieving that sort of comprehensive end-to-end observability, and what would your advice be on how they could be overcome?
I think probably the biggest challenge to us, we're not uncommon to lots of big organisations. We're a cloud-first organisation. Can we consume something as a SaaS product? And if the answer to that is yes, or in the most part, yes, that's the route we're going to take. But that brings its own complexities when we have our own systems that we've developed and looked after, and those two systems need to talk to each other. So we've a ton of middleware, a ton of Azure, event hubs and app gateways and different handshakes between different systems. And it's that complexity for us to try and monitor end to end where we don't necessarily control both endpoints. So it's kind of observing the journey in between those bits and trying to make sure the information is going to the right place and is accurate and timely. So I suppose that's probably our biggest challenge in this kind of cloud world. And I think there's tons of things that Splunk does along that journey to help with some of that instrumentation, and a lot of work we've done on standard patterns and our kind of governance and assurance processes to have as much of that out of the box as we possibly can, and to think about, as I said, I think a little bit earlier, that observability being baked into the culture of everything that we do. When we spin up a new project to introduce a new piece of software, we're already thinking about how does that integrate with all of our existing bits of software. What does that infrastructure look like? Okay, great. How do we instrument that bit of middleware? how do we instrument the journey of that data flow? What does that look like? Great. What does good look like? What does bad look like? What error messages might we would be looking for? And all those kind of things are captured in that design phase by a good project management and business analysis sort of set of processes.
So it really is. It's all about baking it in right from the very start.
As granular as possible. I think in 2025 going into 2026, nobody's batting an eyelid about security being baked into everything we do. It's just an absolute given.
Absolutely.
We're still just about at the kind of the approaching the top of that hill, but people are coming to us to ask, what do we need to consider? What might we not have thought about? How can you help us with the questions we need to ask of our third party implementer, perhaps, or our systems integrators, or the software provider, to make sure we're lining up the right questions to make our life easier when we kind of go through the phases of implementation and all the design, test, build, deploy, fix.
And I suppose the next point is, I guess, making sure that you're not just being reactive, but you're being proactive as well, aren't you? I mean, and that's all part of it, I'm assuming, making sure that it's baked in right at the start, so that so that those observability practices become part of what we call normal jogging, I guess.
Yeah, exactly that. It's observability and automation's baked into our kind of NFR process. That requirements capture at the start of a big project it's front and center. As I said before, it's exactly the same way security is. That DevSecOps bit, we kind of throw an umbrella over all of those things to talk about sort of how observability kind of helps in all kind of three bits of that triangle.
Okay. So what about next thing is slightly moving on. Key considerations for standardization of observability tooling across large organizations. Again, I'd be interested to know what advice you have to offer to anyone that's considering going through this program.
I don't think it's anything hugely radical, but I think really nailing down one or two priority use cases. I think looking back at our example, we looked at an area where we had a little bit of grey coverage. We had a couple of different tools kind of doing 30-40% each of what we wanted to, and then that bit in the middle where there was kind of that almost DMZ of, well, we don't really know.
Right.
And that created a really clear business case for us to go, well, let's do something about that. Let's instrument those bits. Let's use Splunk to be able to analyze what is happening and what has happened, and then us be able to kind of make very actionable, empirical based decisions on our network, as it was in that case. So very much narrowing down that use case. Start small. I think the beauty of Splunk is you can forever keep adding and adding and adding. You don't need to go big bang. You don't need to instrument everything all at once and then go, great, job done, put our feet up and get the newspapers out. It's a constant kind of iterative process. And the more stuff you put in, the more potential problems and the more connections you can see between different subsets of data and different systems and the overall picture. But the beauty of it is it's modular and all of the tools start to talk between each other.
Yeah. And then presumably, I mean, again, we were chatting about this earlier on about post-incident reviews or after-action reviews or whatever you want to call them. How have you seen them differ then since the sort of pre-observability days and the post-observability days?
Yeah, I think probably the big introduction is that ability to look back perhaps a little bit further than we could in the way that Splunk can store and look back over longer periods of time and look for the kind of the juicy bit of the problem and see actually, it causes a big problem this time, but actually that happens this time every month, or that's never happened before, and that kind of clarity of some of those things. But I think also having that power to kind of dive deep into logs and things like that, and coupled with that usual kind of post-incident review where we kind of look at, okay, what were the triggers? Was there anything that happened leading up to that we could perhaps have monitored to prevent it happening? And if there was, what was the remediation? Could that be applied before the thing that happened in order to kind of fix before it went wrong? Perhaps restarting a service or killing some processes on a server. And that kind of informing that sort of cycle of improvement so that we kind of continue to move forward. And we ideally, if you like, our end goal would be never having to deal with the same thing for a second time, because we instrumented it the first time, and the next time it happened, nobody needed to really do anything about it.
I used to work in an organisation that had a great mantra about the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, because you've always wanted to go better, aren't you? You're never quite there, but you can keep pushing. Small gains.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess in part then that sort of plays into the old AI piece as well, doesn't it? I mean, no conversation, of course, these days would be complete without a question about AI and IT ops or AI ops. What's happening in Specs at the moment? How are you working through that process?
Yeah, so definitely AI ops is a buzzword that's made it into our journey. I think we're at the very early stages. We're very cautious about saying, yeah, we're embracing AI ops and this is all the cool stuff we now do that we didn't used to do. I think it's very much iterative. It's very much kind of that. How do we use observability to predict something bad might be happening and then kind of put in place that remediation before something goes pop? You know, as we talked about, kind of restarting services and you know, trying to break it down into simple things. You know, remove the human need for somebody to spot a red light going off or you know listen to an alarm that's going off and kind of go, well, actually, every time that happens, we do this. Every time that happens, let's automatically do this. And feeding that back through the loop of our sort of ITSM environment to kind of be able to kind of log that and still do the same bits we would do to look for patterns and you know look at the incident to problem journey and sort of make sure we're constantly thinking about the iteration bit and still kind of keeping that human in the loop, I guess, from an AI ops perspective.
And is there a balance to be struck between innovation and maintenance? I mean, in AI terms?
Definitely. Usually the kind of the 24 hours in a single day is that kind of ability. There are so many things we could do given infinite time and infinite resource. It's kind of really sort of trying to narrow down that long wish list and that long backlog of things that my team would love to get to and that we've been asked to do and work out where the best bang for buck is.
Yeah. And would you agree with the sentiment that AI systems need observability?
Definitely, yes. And I think they almost kind of can't exist for too long without, because of the amount of data being generated, the amount of things that could go wrong that you've got to be looking for to check they haven't gone wrong, and for kind of doing that resilience and self-healing that's kind of almost baked into that that whole kind of world, if you like.
Yeah, of course. We mentioned at the beginning your role as observability and automation. So where does automation sort of play into this space then? Because we've spent a lot of time talking about observability. Automation doesn't seem, but it's equally as important, isn't it?
Yeah, big time. And it's that kind of observability with action, I guess, is how I would sell my team, both within our business and externally as well. It's kind of, it's great to be able to see the thing that's happening or the thing that has happened, but as I say, how do we automate that away? How do we avoid the pitfalls and the roadblocks if we can see them come in? Well, where can automation come in? And we look at a number of different tools within our team to look at either robotic process RPA automation, or to look at kind of scripted runbook automation, or executing workflows in the Power Platform. What's the right tool for that job? But how does observability inform that action, and then kind of tying that together with our ecosystem of tools to still have that transparency and that audit trail for this thing happened, this automation ran, it was successful, but there's everything wrapped up in a neat bow, and you can still look at that at the end of the month and go, great, didn't we do such a great job?
Big
ideally
backslapping. I was going to say, in an ideal world, I'm sure it's always like that under your watch, Andy. Talk to me about open telemetry as well. How does that sort of what's the sort of interest that Specs have in that, and how does it play out with you?
Yeah, so this is still sort of a world I guess we're dipping our toe in. How do we kind of get more of those metrics in, particularly in our sort of supply chain world? I think most people will know Specsavers from going in and having your eyes tested and perhaps getting a new pair of specs from us, or a hearing test and a hearing aid. But there's a huge amount of our own infrastructure and supply chain and manufacturing that goes on with the Specsavers badge that people don't necessarily get to see. And it's a hugely complicated journey with lots of different machines spitting out different bits of data and tracking order flows and things like that. So it's something we're exploring in that in that space to give us that trace or those traces of that journey from a customer coming in, having their eye tested, getting a prescription, ordering a set of glasses, right, that's where that journey then switches from the store to this kind of huge kind of mega kind of pipeline of manufacturing and distribution, and then that pair of specs or that set of contact lenses arriving at your house or the store to pick up and get fitted.
Right, okay. So
and we see there's a huge power in that. But we're still kind of, I suppose, getting a handle on where that information's useful, where those triggers are, where those problems that kind of can sort of set us on that journey to rectifying a problem before it's even really a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you're the market leaders in this space, aren't you? I was trying to think of who your competitors might be, but
there are plenty of competitors. I think the big advantage we've always had is the scale that we have, and we're fortunate in that we're still family owned, so we're not. We've spoken before about not being kind of beholden to a share price or a stakeholder that has shares in us wanting return on their investment. It's everything that we do can still be funneled through that prism of our delighting our customers, giving our customers the best possible care of their eyesight and their hearing, which is two of the most important things I think we have in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you'll get your bonus this year for that. The CEOs, if the CEO ever listens to this.
Yeah, but, you kind of, I know you said
it's important though. It's important though, isn't it? You've got to believe in it. You've got to believe in it.
I've worked with tons of organisations in the past that have a very clear mission statement. I think our mission statement is so crystallised into the difference that we make, and that being the driver for us. It isn't cash in the till. Cash in the till will follow from a great customer experience. Referrals. Probably one of the best things about working for Specsavers is you go to a party or you go to a children's birthday party and someone talks about how an eye test saved somebody they know's eyesight, or the great service that almost everybody gets when they go into one of our stores, because that's the thing we place so much stock in, and the rest will follow, which is we're in a very fortunate position that's not the same for every organisation, but it genuinely kind of runs through everything that we do. Everything is about delivering that impact.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I guess in part it sort of plays into my next question. One of my last questions really is about with Somerford. You're a big global organisation, global brand. Everyone's heard of you. Somerford, by contrast, is an SME between 80 and 90 employees. Why did you choose Somerford?
I think there's so much we share in the values and the way that we work. It's such a collaboration. I think I don't think I'm fortunate in that our account manager, Rosie, is brilliant. Every account manager you have, I assume, operates in the same way that Rosie does, and it's a genuine collaboration. It's a genuine interest. If something isn't going right for us, being the interface with Splunk or being able to kind of call on expert opinion and advice and support and help is kind of there at the end of the phone all of the time, because you're interested in making sure that we're happy and moving things forwards, and our interest is in making sure we're happy with what we've got and how we move it forwards. And it's genuinely that consultative partnership approach that kind of makes it really easy to deal with you guys, but for us to feel like we get that value back and that we're cared about. We're not just a big ticket or a nice kind of banner that you can put on your website as a client that you work with.
Well, you are that, of course, but inevitably, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's so nice to hear, and I know the team will be really, really pleased to hear that, Andy. Thank you. Last one, you were over at Conf this year, were you? How was that?
Yeah, really good.
They look after you?
My first time over at Conf, yes. Yeah, I was a bit nervous delivering a presentation, but I think it went all right. And, had a few interesting questions.
How many thousand people were there?
Well, there were plenty of thousands of people there. Thankfully, they didn't all turn up to my talk. But yeah, no, it went really well. And there's a really interesting event, a really great. And again, I talked about that kind of, that partnership and that collaboration bit. I think I kind of said a number of different times in a number of different places that Splunk feels the same way that an open source collaboration feels. They provide us a set of tools and then throw it into the sandpit, and we go and break things, and we go and do things that they didn't expect us to do necessarily, or throw huge steaming piles of data at it in an unstructured way, and they kind of sit there and go, "Oh, I really hope our product can handle this," and if it can't, then they have to go, "Well, that's interesting." Yeah. yeah,
Good.
you're seeing that, they're seeing that, they're seeing that.
Yeah.
We need to do something to kind of productize that bit. And I think that kind of, collaborative kind of festival atmosphere really came across. I
good.
came away with tons of different ideas, but also a validation that a lot of the challenges that we face are the same challenges that everyone's kind of working through. And there's so much support and there's so much of a community behind that to kind of troubleshoot and investigate that together. That's kind of, it's a good place to be.
Good. I'm really pleased. Well, listen, thanks ever so much for taking the time to have a chat, to talk through your experiences of observability. And we look forward to further collaboration with you, mate.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks very much.
All the best.
Cheers.